Welcome everyone to the first lab meeting of the new round. After sitting through so many lab meetings by the talented members of our lab, I'm happy to admit that there were presentations which I really wish I'd recorded. And the reason for that is because as the developers and researchers behind so many neat resources, you are usually the best person to provide the narrative behind the work that you do. And this is one of the reasons we'll have a few minor changes to the lab meeting format this time around. So before we get into the nitty-gritty details of what we'll do differently, let's go over some of the other reasons just so we're all on the same page. Now, to understand some of these reasons, let me give you an abridged story on some of the history of some of these projects in our lab and how they've led us to where we are today. Or, as I know it anyway. So opportunities to correct the inaccuracies in this history will be available at the end of the presentation. So let's start with the story with the creation of several large microarray datasets that were generated by researchers, including Andrew at GNF and TSRI. Now, these researchers expected that their datasets would be valuable to the global research community. At the same time, they realized that making the dataset available does not necessarily mean that it is accessible, because microarray datasets like these are giant icky tables and they are not readily digested. So to ensure that the dataset is valuable to the global research community and not just researchers who have access to bioinformaticians, they built a website called SimAtlas, which allowed other researchers to access and visualize their publicly available datasets. And after Andrew, Ben, and Chun-Li moved down the street from GNF to the Scripps Research Institute, they took the lessons they learned from SimAtlas and grew it into this highly customizable, highly extensible BioGPS. Now, the extensibility of BioGPS would allow it to harness resources developed by the community, which would increase its customizability, which in turn would help delay stagnation and obsolescence that a lot of resources face. The extensibility of BioGPS depended on the contributed resources, such as on-trait gene, model organism databases, and more. And a lot of these resources are generated and maintained by a very limited number of experts. If we're talking about harnessing community efforts, there is still a resource that excelled in that regard, but it wasn't being fully utilized in the biomedical space. And looking at the volume of contributors in Wikipedia and realizing that Wikipedia itself could be a resource for even more participation and contributions, the project expanded into Wikipedia with the GeneWiki project, which aimed at seeding Wikipedia with articles on significant human genes so that the community could improve those articles, and essentially we'd have all these entries on human genes in Wikipedia. Additionally, pulling the data from an increasing number of different resources into BioGPS would eventually become problematic, so Chun-Li abstracted the underlying features into a public gene annotation web service provider called mygene.info. From there, the research and development surrounding these resources grew into a lot of different open source projects with the primary goal of making data more manageable and more reusable. For example, the GeneWiki project not only involved unstructured crowdsourced text efforts, but also structured info which would be used to populate info boxes. And this naturally moved the project from just Wikipedia to Wikidata. And the architecture for mygene.info, which allows for fast, easy gene annotation querying, could be adjusted for gene variant annotations, resulting in myvariant.info and so on. And of course, there are many projects not displayed here, which I will leave up to you to discuss in depth. And if there is any part of the abridged history that is wrong or inaccurate, it's because I intentionally did it that way so that I could make the point that you telling your story is better than me telling your story. So our lab's attempt to make data more reusable has frequently meant making data more interoperable, more accessible. So a lot of our efforts naturally align with the principles of fair data, which help define how to make data more usable for the community. But like many existing tools, making data more findable with our tools won't actually make the data more findable unless our tools themselves are findable, which brings us back to the slight changes in our lab meeting format for this round. First, when creating intros to your talks, please assume that you have a very broad audience. Assume that your audience includes experts in completely unrelated disciplines or student interns who are unfamiliar with your work. Spend some time really providing the context behind your work so that it actually makes sense when you're talking about it. Second, the intros, if not your entire presentation, should be recorded, depending on the format of your presentation, and we'll go into some of the recommended formats in a bit. In terms of actually recording your presentation, there are a lot of free tools available for the different operating systems used in our lab. Some free tools will watermark your recordings or set a time limit as to how much you can record, so you should pick your tool with those limitations in mind. And right now, I am using this VDSC free screen recorder. Since we are a lab that makes use of crowdsourcing, I won't investigate all of these tools and how well they work on these different operating systems, and will instead rely on your use and experience with them when you give your presentation to determine the best tool for this purpose. To ensure a decent quality audio recording of your presentation, I've purchased this microphone, which has good reviews from podcasters and YouTubers. Of course, you're welcome to use whatever setup you prefer to get good quality audio. Once you've recorded your presentation, you can upload it to the Zulab Dropbox account or give it to me on a thumb drive. The reason we want good quality audio for your recordings is that the audio tracks can be automatically transcribed when uploaded to YouTube. The higher quality audio is expected to reduce transcription errors due to just low audio quality, leaving us transcription errors due to the transcription software's ability to interpret what you actually presented. And in other words, you can kind of use the transcription as feedback for improving your presentation skills. So if you are a mumbler like me, or tend to talk really fast, it'll tell you, based on the errors, where you're talking too fast or mumbling. It will give you a way to track your space words, like and so, and provide valuable feedback on where you may need to enunciate or slow down when giving presentations in the future. These transcripts can also be cleaned up and used for generating how-to guides and the like, depending on what you actually present. So you can also crowdsource the translation of these transcripts so that your how-to guides can actually be translated into different languages for greater findability and or adoption of your tool and or resource. Long story short, since you will already be putting effort into creating your slides and taking the time to present them, you may as well record them. Thank you.